Okay. This one I was a little concerned about doing. All the past three we've done now have a little backstory as to why I'm doing them.
I've noticed that.
In this particular case, this was always kind of an idea. The whole bachelor party in Vegas leads to terrible, horrible things that need covering up. And I've even heard, comparisons around for a while now. But as far as doing them in a video like this, I kind of postponed it for a long time because I was thinking, these are pretty different. Because there's one that's just a flat-out comedy. And then there's one that is a comedy, but also reaches thriller and horror to an extent.
Yeah.
With gruesome violence and, and it's really interesting when you look up Very Bad Things and you see like all the reviews for it that came out back in 1998. Pretty much all of the critics made some kind of comment like, this new black comedy, and when we say black, we mean like pitch darkness.
Yeah.
Whereas The Hangover is relatively jovial about itself. So I was very, very hesitant about putting these two up against each other, but I kind of hit a snag and had no choice, because what I had decided to do was to do The Hangover and Dude, Where's My Car? Because when you think about it, Dude, Where's My Car is exactly what The Hangover is. The movie could be called Dude, Where's My Dog? And it's the same concept. But, unfortunately, I was having trouble obtaining a copy of Dude, Where's My Car? Which apparently is a difficult thing to do, which is weird. So, and I'd already had this planned, and it was like yesterday, so at the very last minute I said, well, I guess I'll do Very Bad Things. Which is fine. It's not like a sacrifice or anything, because, it's not like they're totally different. But nevertheless, I've just been looking for an excuse to talk about Very Bad Things anyway, so
yes.
This is probably that time. I think I talked about it a long time ago in that one video where I had that pack with this and like Serial Mom and stuff. So anyway, let's go ahead and talk about The Hangover first, because this is probably the main draw if you clicked on this, because this movie has a massive, massive fan base. Massive, totally massive fan base. Extremely, extremely massive. Okay. So Todd Phillips, who he did Old School and Starsky and Hutch, and some other movies just like that are Road Trip, among many other comedies. He was also one of the Oscar-nominated writers on Borat. Decided to make this movie with, at the time, the cast wasn't really as known as they are now. Because by this point, Bradley Cooper's biggest thing was, Wedding Crashers?
Yeah. And
then Galifianakis just really had his stand-up, and Ed Helms had The Office. But I think he was on The Office by this point. And, Justin Bartha, people know from, like, National Treasure, and, the couple of people that saw Geely. But anyway, so the movie's pretty obvious in its setup. Bachelor party in Vegas, getting drunk, drugs, all that, and then they wake up and they have no idea what happened, and they have to piece together everything like clues. It's like a mystery for them to put together the night before to try to figure out where Doug disappeared to, because the wedding is on the brink. So, we have, our characters are Phil, who is Bradley Cooper, who is basically the sleazy troublemaking type. Every time he's brought up to by one of the characters' family members, it's always, oh god, I don't like that Phil. And we get to see this up close and personal because of this scene that is pretty darkly ingenious and hilarious to an extent, where Phil's a teacher who could not possibly care less about his students. So he has put together this field trip, and it's $90 the fee to be able to go on this field trip. So we see students handing in these envelopes full of $90. And then we see, him saying, "Oh, thank you, yes, you're going to have a great time, awesome." And then when everybody's gone, he pulls out this envelope that was in his pocket that's marked Vegas. And he takes out all the money from those kids' field trip fees and puts them into his Vegas envelope. And that's what he's going to use while he's here. Then we have Ed Helms' character, Stu, who is a dentist who loves doing the age-old thing of being a dentist but calling himself a doctor to everybody. And he's got this woman, Rachel Harris, actually. A very funny comedian. And she walks all over him, but he's the kind of character that just kind of lets it happen. He's the one that's, just kind of lets himself be drawn into all the trouble and shit. Because he's just so kind of passive. He's the kind of guy who will propose to his girlfriend at somebody else's wedding ceremony. And then we have Alan, who is Zach Galifianakis' character, who is weird in many ways. Now, we don't get much of a backstory. This joke is also in Horrible Bosses, I forgot to mention it. But, the only thing we know about Alan and his backstory in regards to certain things is they're sitting outside the school waiting for Phil to get out because they're picking him up. And Alan makes this throwaway comment of, "Can we hurry up and get out of here because I'm not supposed to be within 200 feet of a school or a Chuck E. Cheese." And we never know what that's about, but it kind of adds a certain creepiness to his character. Which apparently a lot of people find hilarious, so good for them. And as the movie starts, the interesting thing that it does is as it starts out, it has a lot of cliches going on. Like you have Phil as the guy that's saying, "Oh man, once you get married, you die a little inside every day," that old thing, and then you have Jeffrey Tambor as the guy that does the whole, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas line. All of that. It's all really, really obvious and coming from places we've seen before. But then, once we reach the aftermath and everything that follows, while it does have the same plot and setup as Dude, Where's My Car, this one's a lot more clever about it. I'm basically comparing it to Dude, Where's My Car, even though I'm doing it with other things, but fuck it. But no, this one's a lot more clever about it in a lot of ways. For starters, it is fun the way it leaves clues throughout the whole thing. And subtly, too. Like, the whole... there's a big clue at the very beginning of the movie that tells us where Doug is that we don't pay attention to, and that's the fact that the door always needs propped open when you go to the roof. We see that right away, but our minds never register it, so... and there's clues like that all throughout. The beginning and then the movie itself as it goes. And it throws in those... It's one of those movies where it has a lot of those little things where the more... I think this is why so many people love watching it so many times, is it's one of those movies that kind of has those little things in there that you don't notice right away. There's probably still some. On my most recent viewing, the one that I noticed was... when Rob Riggle and them bring them in to be tasered so they don't have to stay in jail until Monday. He talks to the classroom and he's saying, okay, who wants to tase these people? And every single kid raises their hand. And when you look off to the side with every kid raising their hand, there's also a cop standing by that also raises his hand. That's kind of funny when you catch it. And then there's, there's the stuff where they try to kind of, intentionally avoid the obvious. Like the moment where it's all about, oh, we have to keep the car in mint condition, and oh, it's Jeffrey Tambor's pride and joy, not a single scratch can happen to this car. And you kind of feel like you know where that's going, so when they go to pick it up, it's Ed Helms' character that's saying, "You know what, I'll bet it's just fucked up beyond recognition. I'll bet there's, like, hardly anything left of it. I'll bet it's just totally and completely beat to shit. And it's fine. Just throwing stuff like that in is what adds to its charm. And then there's it's fun to notice all the things that happened in the even though most of it is in the pictures at the end, the slideshow, but it is fun seeing all the various things that happened and trying to figure out exactly how all those things came to be. I do love that. I believe I read somewhere, and then when you look into it, it seems to be true. Every single thing that we see from the aftermath is explained in one way or another, except for the chicken. The chicken is totally and completely unexplained through the entire duration of the movie. I always thought that was a funny little detail. Now, there are some issues here too. I say, cautiously, because I know, this movie has some very, very passionate fans, but, for starters, I'd like to bring up how there are some things wrong with it that are out of its control, which I've talked about before. One of these is how there's some great stuff in this movie that's kind of tainted now, because not just the two sequels, but also other things that really wanted to... This was one of those movies that just became this massive cash cow, where everybody thought they could use this movie and make money off of it. Like, there were... when Galifianakis and Ken Jeong started showing up in a lot more things after this movie, there was that really fucking annoying trend that was never funny to begin with, where instead of saying their names, like Zach Galifianakis or Ken Jeong, in the promotional stuff, they thought they'd be funny and actually call them the guy from The Hangover. I really hated that shit. Like, when Ken Jeong started on Community, that's what they called him in the advertisements. And when, this Youth in Revolt came out right after this, and that's how they advertised Galifianakis. It's stuff like that. And, you have your straight-to-DVD rip-offs and actual theatrically released movies that just want to cash in on this. And because of that, its reputation, I think, has been a little tainted. So, especially because of the second movie, when they basically just tried to rehash everything. I think that kind of... The movie still stands alone just fine when you watch it again, but there is that tainted quality there that wasn't there before, where you kind of... The magic isn't quite there the way it used to be because of that. Because everybody wanted to make money off of something that happened to luckily break out. Because I had totally forgotten this until I watched it again recently, because he's so played out and stuff like that, and just, annoying, and they just overdo it as much as they possibly can because they think they're playing into what fans want, and end up just shooting themselves in the foot. But, I forgot how much I actually love the character of Leslie Chow in the first movie. Because he's only in it for, 2 minutes. And he sets up like he's going to be, this big villain. And his plot is, wrapped up just like that. And he had these little great moments there. But all they did was want to take Ken Jeong and milk that 2 minutes of screen time as far as they possibly could. And that kind of brings it down. But, as I've been saying, you can't fault the movie for that. Because in 2009, this was what it was, without anything like that in front of it or behind it. I think another thing that makes it appealing is, I gotta tread lightly here as well. I really love Bradley Cooper and Ed Helms in this movie. I particularly love the character of Stu. I think probably because I can relate to him the most. Because he's the one that's kind of, always really, really hesitant to get into any kind of trouble, and whenever he's even close to it, he's the one that says, fuck this, and runs away from it. And of course, Bradley Cooper is there was this thing for a while there where I was always under the impression that, Bradley Cooper is one of those people where, even if he's a really, really nice guy in real life, he just kind of looks like a douchebag. And this was pretty much the perfect role for him. I know you have his Oscar-nominated work in David O. Russell movies like Silver Linings Playbook and American Hustle. And yeah, Pat Solitano and Richie DeMasso were great roles for him. But honestly, Phil is that character where I feel like it was just tailor-made for Bradley Cooper. Now, on to a more controversial opinion. Galifianakis and the character of Alan in itself. I gotta be honest with you people, I really just don't find this character funny. I don't really know what it is. I don't know if it's like awkward laughter from an audience because he's just so weird, or what it is. But I've just never found this character funny. And I know he's like the most beloved one of the whole movie. He's the one that everybody wants to quote and everybody talks about and all that. And now he's pretty much like, I'm not very familiar with his stand-up, but it seems like ever since then he's pretty much carried this personality that is Alan into the rest of his work. Especially like Between Two Ferns and all that. It's really, really tired now, and I was never a fan to begin with, and I just do not get the appeal of this character, and I am sorry for that, but I've just never gotten it. Though we will be seeing him in Birdman, so we'll see what he does there, but for the most part, that's my one big problem with this movie, is that's the character that everybody wants to focus on, and that is just one. I just do not think that character is funny, and I can't get into him. That's the extent of that, really. But regardless of that, I do have to give it a lot of credit, and I know Roger Ebert has a comment on here that's exactly what I'm about to say, actually. With this concept, and the fact that it turns into almost an action movie, especially in the third movie, like when we get into the Leslie Chow plot and all that, and the big Rain Man spoof and stuff like that, this movie could have really lost itself, because there is a horrible trend I've been bringing up a lot lately, where comedies forget their comedies and get so invested in their story that they stop being funny and just want to do, whatever it is they've gone into. And they don't try to be funny while they're doing it, going into their story. This is a movie that sticks to the comedy from beginning to end, no matter what scenario is brought to their attention next, which is something to admire it for. So yes, I didn't take to it the way everybody else did, but I do still think it's really funny, and I do think it's rewatchable. There's just some aspects of it that I didn't care for as much as others, and the other way around. But I can understand watching it, how it's reached its, modern classic status. It's worth noting it also went on to win the Golden Globe for Best Picture, as far as comedy and musical, which was weird, but it happened, and we have to deal with it. I'm struggling to remember what its competition was that year. 9, and some other things. So yeah, that's my feelings on that. So yeah. Very Bad Things, however, is a totally different monster. Very Bad Things is written and directed by Peter Berg. This was his first movie as a director. And it's very interesting he hasn't gone to that territory since. Now he's into, big action movies, like, The Rundown and Battleship and, Lone Survivor. The Lone Survivor was a much more personal movie, but still, because of this, I've been really, really interested, and I've really been dying to know what it would be like if Peter Berg tried to tackle black comedy again. Because this movie is a trip. Same thing, they go to Vegas, they get drunk, they do drugs. We get a couple of shots of Jeremy Piven and Christian Slater doing fucking cocaine. Everything is more hardcore about this. And of course, this leads to them. I do love the kind of shot there too, because we have Jon Favreau, who's the one who's getting married, and Cameron Diaz is the bride-to-be, and she's the really insane, controlling, with all the murders in this movie, Cameron Diaz is probably the most insane character in the movie. And she too commits a murder, so there's that. So he always has to call her and tell her that he's not going to get in too much trouble and stuff like that. So they go, they do their gambling, they're having fun, everything's great. And then he's on the phone with her and she says, okay, go have fun, but don't have too much fun. He's like, oh, I'm going to go, but I'm not going to have too much fun. And it's immediate cut of the cocaine on the table, and Leland Orser jumping around the room. And then he and Daniel Stern getting drunk in the bathroom, talking about the Godfather, being the Godfather to his children, and how the storm's going to come and wipe the trees out. It's worth noting Daniel Stern is fantastic in this. And everybody is. And Christian Slater is kind of their ringleader. He's the one that plans it. He's the one that hires the stripper. He's always been the troublemaker. And Cameron Diaz lets that be known immediately. And he's just like this really scummy realtor. And I always love that moment where they're just kind of looking around the house and he's saying like, could you stay off the property until I'm off the phone? And they're like, well, why would we do that since we're buying the house? And he just says, because that's the way we do it. If you want a douchebag, there is nobody who can play it better than the underrated Christian Slater. Sometimes it actually angers me how underrated Christian Slater is. And he is phenomenal in this movie. He is Oscar-worthy in this movie. He is just... Robert Boyd is just this total and complete psychopath. And so he hires this prostitute, Tina. And she comes in and she dances for them. And Jeremy Piven is kind of the group fuck-up. He's the one that's kind of, you know... People are just kind of... He's off to the side and, you know... Is most likely the one that's going to do something stupid. And that is the case here when he says, you know what? Screw the lap dances. I'm going to take the prostitute in the bathroom and fuck her brains out. And while this is happening, they're going on, and then the whole scene, it's amazing how the scene builds, and you know just something horribly horrible is about to happen. You have, like, the MMA going on the big, projected on the big screen, and Leland Orser's getting more and more out of control, and Boyd's off on some rant. And then you have Michael in the bathroom with this prostitute, and they're so into it that he slams her into the wall, and a spike that is in the wall goes through her head and kills her instantly. And he's still going with her afterwards. It's not till after he's finished that he realizes that something is off. And that's our... If you don't know this movie, that's our setup. That's how fucking sick this movie is. But in a great, twisted way. And then we have this big scene where they try to figure out how they're going to get rid of her. And it finally comes to it that she knows she's tiny and she's late. They can just take her downstairs, take her out in the desert and bury her, and nobody will see her. Because, as Boyd says, exact quote, the room is covered with blood and it looks like the Manson family stayed here for a weekend. So that's their plan, but then they get a knock on the door. And it's a security guard, a very friendly security guard, who they basically pay off and say, you know, here's for the damages, and, you know, we were just doing a little drugs. And he's like, well, I got no problem with that. And there's like, oh, they're finally going to get rid of him. And then he sees the dead prostitute in the mirror. And Boyd acts immediately and decides to pick up a corkscrew and stab the security guard repeatedly and throw him into the bathroom and lock him in there. And that's when this movie turns from black comedy into flat-out frightening. This scene is fucking scary. What it is they have apparently the door doesn't have a lock on it, so they all five have barricaded it. And the security guard's a big dude. And he's trying to bust through the door and get out. And he's shrieking. And they have to barricade the door and wait for him to bleed to death. And this scene is really, really... But you see, that's the thing. Is normally I would say, whoa, what the fuck is up with the tone of this movie? But the thing about it is this movie handles it so well. Like if it wasn't so effectively scary when it happens, I'd probably criticize it. But the way Peter Berg seems to have such a grasp on what he's doing, and can handle it in just the right way, that it somehow weirdly fits. which really says a lot to his talent as a director, which is why he's got, that's why they're giving him the big budgets now, because he really knows what he's doing. And as a writer, the dialogue is really funny in a really dark and twisted way. I said it's absolutely gruesome, because obviously since the security guard is such a big guy, we have that moment where Boyd surveys the situation, and there's blood everywhere, and we have the two bodies, and he just turns to them and says, okay, new plan. And then we see them, and they're like at Walmart, buying shit to cut them up into little pieces, and then wrap them up in plastic and take them out in the desert. But the thing about it is, even though it does reach those scary moments, it always remembers that it's a comedy, which is the key thing here. Because we have those moments, like, we've reached the darkest of the dark. They're out in the middle of the desert, and they have the bags of body parts wrapped in plastic. But then Daniel Stern makes this big fuss and says, whoa, this isn't right. Their bodies need to be together as one. We have their parts mixed together. This can't be happening. We have to have their own parts with the other parts of their own body. So they eventually give in, and there's this hilarious scene where they have to take all the body parts out and throw them around, and we have Boyd saying like heads up and then throwing one of their heads, and the hilarious shot of Leyland Orser losing his mind saying, I have his upper leg and her lower leg. And he's just repeating that to himself, losing it. The fact that you can add comedy to a scene like that speaks to how great Peter Berg was in making this movie. And then you have just the flat out, more broad comedy moments, like at Daniel Stern's funeral, when we hear a woman crying really loud. And we're panning over everybody, and we see that the really high-pitched woman-like crying is actually Jeremy Piven. And then one of the really great dark moments in this movie is the deaths of Jeremy Piven and Jane Trevor-Horn. Because they happen off-screen, but we know this is a point that Boyd has completely and totally lost his mind. And it's going to tie up all the loose ends. So they go out, and they get Piven super drunk, while Boyd is at home with Jane Trevor-Horn, who he plans on killing. But the trouble is that she fights back. And then finally, after he has subdued her, he calls and says, bring Michael over and we're going to have a talk, and everybody's going to be great. So Boyd comes out and he takes Michael inside, and we focus on Kyle and Moore talking in the car, Favreau and Leyland Orser. And they're just having this nice conversation, and then we hear a gun go off. And it's this great shot where Boyd gets in the back seat of the car and lights a cigarette, and we just see his silhouette. We can't see his face. And he's created this whole story about how Michael was in love with Lois, and he killed his brother in a jealous rage, and then strangled Lois, and then shot himself in the head. Which we all know that Boyd killed them. And then after he said this whole dark story, he kind of leans into the light, and we see the blood all over his face, and he says, man, Lois, she can fight like a fucking Comanche. And it just goes that way through the whole time. It always keeps up with the black comedy. It never loses itself in the darkness of it. Boyd's Fate, for instance, where Cameron Diaz has had it up to here with his bullshit of killing everybody. She's had enough of it. So she says, you're going to go out there and you're going to move the body so no cops find them because it's going to cut into my marriage. And now Boyd is wanting the money that they would be getting from Adam and Lois's deaths because they were the godparents of their children. The life insurance. So when Cameron Diaz overhears this, while in her wedding dress, she grabs a coat rack and proceeds to beat Boyd to death. And put him in the bathroom. But that's not the end, though. Because Boyd fucking comes back. And there's this little nice scene of darkly comedic suspense where Boyd's the one with the wedding rings. And they're in the middle of the ceremony. While Boyd's corpse is in the bathroom. So Moore has to go get them. And Boyd is slowly making his bloody way. It's really disgusting, the effects they did here. Because he's been beaten beyond recognition by this point. And he's slowly, bloodily crawling his way to the wedding ceremony. And Moore basically has to beat him there. And accidentally finishes him off by knocking him down the stairs with the door by accident. And then the great ending, where when they go to bury Boyd's body and move the rest of the bodies, he and Moore crash. And Cameron Diaz, of all the people, of all the bad things that happen in this movie, and all the horrible things people do, it's Cameron Diaz that must get her comeuppance. And she does. It's now, that scene is like really famous now, of her just walking into the middle of the streets and losing her mind. So, you have the dog on that's limping around, and you have the ungrateful children who are complete hellions, and Moore and Fisher are just, like, beyond repair. It's such a sick and fucked up movie, and that's why we love it. And it's always actually been a personal favorite of mine. So yes, it's just the perfect black comedy, because it goes so dark, but never loses sight of itself, as far as being a comedy. The comedy is always there, even if you have to have, like, a really fucking sick sense of humor to laugh at it. Which I apparently do, because I think this movie's hilarious and great. And the one I would choose between the two, obviously, so... Yes. That's it for this.
So, one more verse is down and in the books next week. Don't know what it's going to be yet. We'll find out. I will make my return next week, and we will get that verses. And it looks like we're going to be doing Exodus and Top 5 next week as well for our AJ's movie reviews. Hopefully you enjoyed the reunion content. Hopefully you enjoyed the Disney content. Universal content coming this week. And who knows, maybe some special guests. We'll find out. So stay tuned to Pop for that. And AJ, any parting words?
That's it.